Making the legal case for reparations today, part 3. Stay tuned right after this.
That Corbin and Corbin legal team fighting for the rights of the people. That father-daughter team investing in the youth when the system ain't treating them equal. Providing truth for our people, we able to reach them. So anytime you get accused for a crime and Lord knows you ain't do it, we here to get you through it. Exemplifying prudence and glorifying God, making sure you're compensated for other people's doings. Our vision is to be one of the best. We're small enough to focus on your matter throughout the neighborhoods of Dallas. Working constantly and making sure your rights are protected. A firm team of lawyers, aggressive, effective. The team that has your back in the courtroom. Two well-spoken black lawyers in the courtroom. Investing time and resources when it's evident that you were treated wrong. Now you walking out of Dallas courtroom with a settlement. Corbin and Corbin, the father-daughter legal tag team that has your back in the courtroom. Our purpose is simple. To obtain a favorable outcome for each client and glorify Christ in all we do. Our vision is to be one of the best and most...
Hello, Rebels. My name is Attorney Chloe Corbett, a.k.a. the Justice of Justice. And with me I have...
Attorney Augustus Corbett, a.k.a. the Minister of Justice.
We are the Defiant Lawyers. We provide legal analysis of treating politics, policies, personalities, and pop culture to empower you to fight this unjust legal system. Before we get into today's topic, why don't you go ahead and like this video, hit the subscribe button, and share this video with your family and friends so that they can get this informational, educational, and entertaining knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. With that, Dad, happy Saturday, happy Juneteenth. How are you doing today?
I am doing very, very, very well. Hope you are. Happy Juneteenth, what's the word? Juneteenth Eve.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Juneteenth is on Monday, right? That's the actual official day that we'll celebrate it. It is tomorrow. So I guess it still is Eve. So happy Juneteenth Eve.
Yes. And I'm so glad to be celebrating it. We've been celebrating Juneteenth for many years. For those of you who don't know, Juneteenth, it stands for June 19, 1865, when slaves in Galveston, Texas, received word that they were free, that President Abraham Lincoln had given the Emancipation Proclamation, ended slavery back in 1863, but the slaves in Galveston did not find out until June 19 of 1865. So there's been various celebrations of Juneteenth in the 200 years almost since then, and it just recently became a national holiday. So it's a great holiday, it's a wonderful holiday, and I hope you all will enjoy it tomorrow and Monday as well.
Absolutely, and for the past couple of weeks, we have been talking about reparations. As Chloe said, we're making the legal case for reparations, and today is going to be the final installment of that discussion. I think we made the case, Chloe. What do you think?
I certainly think we did. For all of our new viewers who did not see part 1 and part 2, I highly encourage you all to go watch those first 2 episodes in this series so that you can get a backstory on reparations, on the term 40 acres and a mule, our definition of reparations, how we define it, and our arguments for it. So I encourage you all to go back, look at part 1 and part 2.
Yes, so, you can kind of consider week 1 and week 2, or part 1, part 2, as the opening statement, and then we begin to present some evidence. Last week we spent some time talking about the definition, our definition of reparations. Today we're going to look at who benefited from reparations and make the case for why we deserve to be compensated or repaired for all the damage that was done to the African American community. And the damage has been substantial. It has been very, very, very And basically, without reparations, the wealth gap between African Americans and white Americans will likely never be closed. We can do all the things that we know to do to be successful financially, get the best education, save money to the bone, make very, very good financial decisions. All the other things that we know that tend to create wealth in America, and we still would not close the wealth gap because it is that wide, it is that big between Black Americans and white Americans.
Our music has been going in the past few minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't hear any music. What about now?
Yes.
That's it? It's gone?
It's gone now.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm actually using a new piece of equipment, so I don't know what happened, but the music should have been gone. But it's gone now, right?
It's gone now.
All right. So as I was saying, the wealth gap is just really, really, really big, so big that without reparations, we cannot close it. We cannot close it. And so that's why it's so very, very important. So we got some slides. We're going to go back and show how America actually benefited tremendously, Chloe, because one of the things whites love to say is, why should they have to be taxed to pay reparations when they didn't benefit from slavery? Well, I have two responses to that. Reparations are based not only on slavery and Jim Crow, but reparations are also based on present day systemic racism. Mm-hmm. So reparations are based on all three, number one, and number two, it is just completely, totally ridiculous for white Americans to say that they have not benefited from slavery, Jim Crow, and systemic racism. It is the reason that white Americans have about 10 times more wealth than Black Americans. Okay? So it's just a ridiculous notion.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And I mean, sorry, you all may hear my dog in the background. This is a live show. She's kind of going crazy, but I mean, America would not be the superpower that it is, and we would not have the economy that we had today if it were not for the slave labor force that occurred, from the 16, 17, 1800s until it was abolished. I don't believe we probably would not be in the position that we are today to be one of the world's superpowers if it were not for that force. So it's just completely false for white Americans today to say that they have not benefited from slavery, because America would not be the economic nation that it is if it were not for slavery as well.
That's right. So the slide that we have up now, and we're going to go through a lot of slides, so we're going to move kind of fast. The slide that we have now begins with how the American colonies were able to acquire the land here in America. Native Americans were basically robbed of this land. And this shows, okay, so I just got that your mic doesn't sound as good. Let me see what I can do to fix that. Okay, go ahead, try now, Chloe.
Yes, check 1, check 2.
All right. So let us know if that sounds better. All right. So the story of the American um, empire starts with Native Americans. They were the rightful landowners. Okay, we got that straight now. So they were the rightful landowners before the Europeans arrived. And the Europeans basically took through war, um, the landmass. So from this map here, we see that they were able to acquire through the military, the New Orleans area, the Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia area, the Florida area, and um, and then later on they North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and so on. So the story of slavery actually begins with the story of the Native Americans. Um, so having
Yeah.
a so having Chloe acquired this landmass, then the settlers got the bright idea of we need someone now to harvest this land. And I always wondered, why didn't they say, let's harvest our own land? I mean, why why did they think they needed someone else to harvest their land to do the work? What do you think about that?
Um, I think that I mean, I feel like the European
Well,
empires, they had already had a precedent of, colonizing different
true.
countries,
Yes,
going in different nations, bringing back slavery, using slavery forces, pillaging the nation, taking the resources. So I think they thought, well, hey, let's just do that with this new land continent that we found as well.
that is
It
very
had already been done before.
yeah. But do you also think a little bit of laziness in there? I mean, because they love to call Black Americans lazy. I mean, they always not all. I'm not generalizing all whites, but that is sort of a slur that is often applied to Black Americans. We're lazy. We don't like to work.
I think that is it. Because they could have got out there themselves and worked the land themselves, but they didn't. They had to go steal people and make people slaves. And it's not something that they just did in America. They did it all over the globe, Africa, Southeast Asia, South America. So they were just falling into the patterns when they came over to the New World.
And I think you make an excellent point, though, that by the time they arrived here, they had already had a history and a precedent of stealing people from Africa and working. They did so in Europe long before they arrived here. They did so in the United Kingdom, Portugal, various places on the continent of Africa. Pardon me, on the continent of Europe. So I guess they just sort of did what they always had done.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, so they used the military, used basically guns. The Indians, the Native Americans were using bow and arrows, from my understanding, but the Europeans had created guns, so they were able to use that superior military might to basically take the land. And then, as I said earlier, they got the bright idea now, let's go get some Africans to work the land force free. Now, this next slide here, you can't see it very well, I don't think. Okay. But it says acquisition of cotton land. So they begin to start harvesting and farming cotton on these areas that we see here. Okay. Do you see that?
Yes.
Um, looks like there is some
Well,
comments on YouTube. I want to acknowledge the political scientist. Good afternoon to you as well. Thank you for tuning in.
thank you.
So, cotton is king, is the old saying. So, they started harvesting cotton in those southern states. They stole the land, and then they stole um, folks to work the land, right?
Yeah, and I remember the cotton gin mill. I think it was created right around this time, and that's really when they began to go into overdrive with using slave labor to um, manufacture cotton, and that's really when it went into a lot of super production with these colonies. And it was right around what is the time that is shown in this slide from 1840 to 1850. I mean 1814 to 1840, excuse me.
Okay. All right. So let's see the progression here. So the distribution of cotton production by county in the 1800s, the darker the patches, that means more cotton was being produced. So we see some dark spots in the Maryland, D.C., Virginia area on down through North Carolina, some parts of South Carolina and Georgia, and lighter spots in Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee. Cotton production hadn't quite in the 1800 hadn't quite gotten down to larger parts of Georgia and Florida and so on. But it's coming because as we see 1840, now cotton production was just throughout the South there.
It's amazing just how the southern economy was so dependent on using cotton, and if it were not for that dependence on using cotton and using the slave force to manufacture that cotton, there's no telling where the southern states would be in terms of their economy. They the government always likes to talk about the American dream and American intellectualism, but they could have used other ways, come up with other ideas, come up with other innovation to get their economy off the ground without enslaving an entire group of people and using a slave force. So to me, it's excuses for the southern states to have said, "Well, we need slavery for our economy," and then on the other hand, they say, "Well, we're the land of innovation and the land of the American dream." They don't go hand in hand because instead of innovating, under a capitalistic society of what we're in, they were just dependent on slavery, which is at reprehensible.
Well, I mean, in their minds, they're thinking we can maximize um, the production of cotton by using basically free labor. If we got a workforce here that will work as long as we say, do whatever we say for a fraction of what it normally would cost, then in their minds, that's just maximizing profit. And
Yeah, and that's some of the issues that I have with capitalism. Um, but that's a different topic for a different day. uh, but it's just, and then to use the Bible, in the first part of this series, we spoke about how there's precedent for reparations in the Bible, but for them to then not use the Bible to try to justify slavery when we know that it was just for economic reasons to try to make as much money as possible. That's another hypocrisy with our government and with the southern states as well.
yeah, and since you mentioned the Bible, there is certainly precedent for reparations. Now, they will point out that there is also precedent for slavery in the Bible. And I've had this discussion. I remember I had this discussion in law school with some whites. And I pointed out, yes, there is slavery in the Bible. Um, so is divorce. So is murder. So is rape. But none of that was sanctioned by the Lord. That was never God's intention. Slavery, like divorce, was never God's intention. All of that is a result of the fall of man. So, yes, we do see slavery in the Bible, but Again, if we're going to be honest in our exegesis of scripture, we need to go back to Genesis chapters 1 before the fall of man, and there we will see exactly what God had in mind for humans, and it did not include slavery.
Yeah. Period.
Period. All right, so by the 1840s, the cotton industry had spread throughout most of the South. All right. Now, 1860, it spread completely over southeastern states. By now, it was also in the state of Texas, where we reside, and Louisiana. I mean, it was all over because, again, cotton was king back then. It was making the country a lot of money. And as you pointed out, there were alternatives. But if you got this large landmass, free or cheap labor, and I say cheap because the only thing they had to pay was food, what little food there was, they gave to the enslaved folks. And I don't like calling our ancestors slaves. Be honest, I prefer the word enslaved. Slave is not what God calls us. Um, we were in a condition of enslavement, our ancestors. So I prefer to use that. And I don't like using the term master,
Yeah.
slave and master. I prefer to use the terms enslaver or plantation owners. It's the way I tend to look at it. But yes, cotton by now was like I said, king. It was making the country a lot of money. The nation's wealth in the early days was built and established on cotton. And we're going to see in just a moment that it wasn't just benefiting southern states, it was benefiting northern states in a tremendous way, in a tremendous way. And not just southern and northern states, but the states that would also become a part of the country. It was all based on the production and sale of cotton, which was all based on the slave labor of Africans.
Yeah. I mean, that's how this nation became a superpower, like we were saying earlier. And that's what allowed America to grow as rapidly as it did in such a short amount of time. Because, I mean, when you look at our history compared to Africa, countries in Asia, European countries, we are very, very, very young
True,
compared to those other ancient governments and systems and countries. And what allowed us to develop so quickly was the illegal use of the enslaved people and slave labor to have this cotton boom, which led into the Industrial Revolution in the early 20th century as well.
true. All right.
We have another slide up here. Distribution of slave population by county from 1800, 1840, and 1860. And as you can see, the darker that it gets is the amount of the slave population, and that
in
that that
in 1800, and I'm gonna pull up 1840 and 1860.
right in 1800. The dark part of that, the lower section of the southern United States. I mean, how dark it is. That just tells you how reliant those southern states' economy was on slave labor because it had a high population of slaves as compared to the northern United States and the western states as well.
And I want to tell the listeners to stay with us throughout this show today, because the last thing that we're going to show is how much reparations African Americans should get. And the number is staggering. So hang out with us all the way to the end. That's going to be the last thing that we show and talk about.
Yeah.
All right. So, Chloe, this shows that as cotton grew, the enslaved population grew. right? So they reached out more and more. In other words, they went back to Africa even more and more and more as they saw how prosperous cotton was for the country, for the colonies, for the states, right? So as it grew, the slave population grew. So here, can't see this that well, um, but we do see that in the sort of mid-Atlantic states, a little bit above North Carolina, you see that the enslaved population um, was large, and I really would like to see this closer. I'm hoping folks can see it closer because it shows the ports where a lot of enslaved people came um, from Africa, and the three major ports are, let's see, the three major ports are New Orleans,
Hmm.
Charleston, and up in Virginia, I think maybe Norfolk, Virginia, and even Maryland.
Hmm.
And so those were the major ports, okay, where slave ships were coming in. And then the Africans were then distributed from those ports. For example, I know from the elders in my family that there's a where I grew up is in the Wilmington, North Carolina area. And Wilmington was also a major slave port. So the slaves would come in there in Wilmington, and there's a river that runs from Wilmington to a large part of North Carolina. It's called the Cape Fear River, and so the enslaved folks um, would be transported by that river to various parts of North Carolina and even South Carolina by way of the Cape Fear River. Um, all right, so 1860, the enslaved population you see now has spread completely throughout the southeastern states and even the mid-Atlantic states. And that again was because cotton was just so profitable that they're doing everything they can to, create cotton farms throughout the South, basically.
Yeah, that's that supply and demand that is, associated with capitalism and free market. Um, the demand for cotton became so exponential because it was just everywhere that they started going back to the motherland to supply to supply to try to meet the demands of the cotton. And how did they try to get the supplies? They considered human beings, Africans, black people, just as a vehicle to meet the demand of cotton. And I mean, it's just when you just think about it and you just say it, we get so desensitized to it.
Yes,
Um,
it's
especially us because we talk about it all the time.
right.
And people who don't talk about it, it's whitewashed. It's not really, you really don't go into it, but they literally saw us as just a way to make money to meet the demand of making cotton. So how did they do that? Okay, let's go get some more black people, bring them over from Africa, enslave them, and make them meet this demand of cotton. I mean, it's such a warped thinking, such a evil thinking, honestly.
Yeah, it's diabolic.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean you expressed it very well. In that they saw the demand for cotton, so they went and continued to bring Africans over here to produce that cotton. And I
Yeah.
want everybody to keep in mind that we don't have the northern states here, but they are participating very much in this entire slave industry. All right,
Yep.
we're going to show that in
And
just
by the way, while we're still on this slide, I want to point out to people because in part one and part two, we talked about General Williams' order, which is directly after the Civil War, there was a federal order that would have given land, 400,000 acres of land, to previously enslaved Black people, and it would have gone from South Carolina all the way down to Florida. They had seized 400,000 acres of land that they were going to give to the newly freed slaves, and they were going to divide that to households of these newly freed slaves and give those slaves 40 acres and a mule. And I think that this map that you had up here, Dad, just shows um, kind of the corridor of land that the government was going to give us. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. President Lincoln was assassinated. The next president that came in, completely overturned the Reconstruction laws and policies that Lincoln's administration was trying to put into place, and we never got our 40 acres and a mule, meaning we never got our reparations.
That's right. Now, this map, ironically, you see the state of South Carolina. It's very dark, which indicates there were a lot of enslaved Africans in that state, a lot, especially on the coast. And Chloe, as you said, this was the corridor that would be used for those 40 acres. Now, ironically, that dark area there, I grew up not far from that area, and it is where Myrtle Beach is, and a beautiful beach, by the way. I just loved going to it growing up. But a part of Myrtle Beach was owned by Blacks for a long time, until like the last 40, 50 years, when developers began to steal Black land. So although most Blacks didn't end up with those 40 acres, Blacks still, through hard work and just grinding, still ended up purchasing a lot of land. So if you go to Myrtle Beach today, if you go, I think, to North Myrtle Beach, there are still Black owners, a few Blacks who own the areas there, who own the some of the land there. It's undeveloped, it's not like the other areas, but I always go through there when I'm in the Myrtle Beach area. I always ride through and try to, buy something and so on to help the Blacks there. All right, let me.
Yes, y'all got to see. We do have some comments that
Yes,
I
go
want to
ahead.
acknowledge real quick.
Okay.
I see Alicia's up here. Hey, girl, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it.
Yes.
No None, another rebel. He or she is up here, and they said that Eli Whitney's cotton gin was a big part of the slavery boom. Yeah, we mentioned that earlier. It's amazing how much the cotton gin just just turned the slave system, produced so much cotton, and then obviously, I don't want to say masters, but the plantation owners, as you said earlier, to try to meet that demand, they went to Africa and kept getting slave after slave after slave. It's a shame.
And No brought out how Eli Whitney thought that producing the cotton gin, because cotton had kind of, production had sort of decreased, and they were about to get away from it in the southern states. But then when he invented that cotton gin, the plantation owners said, "Oh, wait, hold on, this is a great invention. So we're gonna ramp up more cotton production." So they didn't move away from cotton production as a result of that invention. Thank you for that comment, No. All right, so 1840. Okay, now is that a little backwards? Yes, should be 1840 before 1860. So 1840. The enslaved population wasn't quite as big as in 1860. So again, that's growing as the cotton industry is growing. Let me see if I can go back to show you what I mean here. That's the cotton industry. So the enslaved population is increasing as the cotton production is increasing. All right, now we'll go to another slide. And by the way, let me acknowledge that much of this information is coming from two sources. this great book entitled From Here to Equality: Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. It's a great, great, great book. Great, great book. I think it's the best book written on reparations. And also, we used The Half Has Not Been Told by Edward Batiste, or Batista. The Half Has Not Been Told, and he chronicles how profitable the cotton industry was for this nation. All right. Now, From Here to Equality, these are quotes from that book. And it says, from the docks of Providence, Rhode Island. So now, Chloe, we're getting ready to see how the northern states benefited from the cotton industry. Okay. From the docks of Providence, Rhode Island, and Boston and Salem, Massachusetts, a round robin of outgoing ships carrying dairy products, fish, and rum followed vessels unloading slaves, sugar, and molasses, providing provisions for these slaves and for the vast plantations in the U.S. South, the Caribbean, and South America. Required the efforts of staggering numbers of financiers, merchants, shippers, insurers, real estate brokers, auctioneers, and laborers. Now, this is so important. We just think about the enslaved people and what they're producing, but all these various industries are being created to service the cotton industry and the slave industry. And we also often forget, Chloe, and leave out the enslaved Africans that were in the Caribbean and in South America. Okay, huge populations. In fact, there are more African descendants in Brazil than there are in North America.
Mm. That's amazing. A lot of people, just like you said, that don't realize the slave Africans to America was a much smaller percentage of the Africans that went to South America and Latin America.
That's right.
I remember reading a figure on it, and I can't remember it now off the top of my head, but it's I want to say it's 2, maybe even 3-1 that went to South America versus the Africans that came here to North America, which is insane to think about. And I mean, what you just said about the number of African descendants in just Brazil alone, that doesn't include all of the other countries
Brazil.
in
Yep.
South America. Just Brazil is amazing too.
And I want to point out again, to service all of these enslaved people and all the products that they were creating and all the cottage industries that were associated with this cotton industry and with this slave industry. I mean, that people made a lot of money. People were making buku money, not just the plantation owners, but again, the people who are servicing the plantations. They were all, creating great, great sums of money that enabled the white population to start getting way ahead of African Americans. And to this day, they have been able to accumulate that wealth where we have not to this day. And it all started in slavery and as a result of the cotton industry and enslaved African people.
Yeah, and not just plantation owners, men up north, U.S. presidents. They benefited from slave labor as well. There were George Washington owned slaves, Thomas Jefferson owned slaves, other presidents owned slaves, and so even the leader of America.
Can we say they enslaved people?
They enslaved people. Excuse me. They enslaved people. So my
It's just a little thing, a little pet peeve that I have. I don't. Someone corrected me years ago, and I appreciated it, and it sort of sticks out in my head even to this day.
yes, please continue to remind me when I say that. They enslaved people. So the leadership of this country benefited from it as well. That's what I want people to see.
All right. So another quote from Here to Equality. Slavery has long been identified in the national consciousness as a Southern institution. The time to bury that myth is overdue. Slavery is a story about America, all of America. The nation's wealth from the very beginning depended upon the exploitation of Black people on three continents. Okay? Powerful quotation.
Mhm.
All right. Slave grown cotton was the national currency that seeded the growth of several American cities before the Civil War. Between 1821 and 1860, New York City, a major importer of cotton, became the nation's and the world's largest commercial and financial center. And it still enjoys that distinction to this very, very day.
Mm.
And it all started from the cotton industry.
So what's that saying? What that is saying is that New York City would do business with the plantation owners, and they would, bring the cotton that the enslaved people harvested, and use the cotton for whatever they wanted to use in the textiles in New York City. So even though New York City directly did not enslave people, they were benefited from the work that the enslaved people produced, which was the cotton. Well, I mean, which is and it's funny because when you go up north, you hear a lot. Well, we're not racist, or there was never slavery here, but you all benefited, just like the rest of America,
Oh,
just like the American government. You benefited from it, and still do to this day.
and when we talk about benefit, I mean that, look, the New York City area economy and the state and those northern states were built on cotton.
Hmm.
That old saying, cotton is king, I didn't coin that. Blacks didn't coin that. Whites coined that phrase because they know the money they made from the cotton industry from the very southern tip of Florida to the very northern tip of whatever state is up there. What is it? Rhode Island or something?
Maine,
Maine, yeah,
something.
Maine, whatever. I mean, cotton was king. And as we said a moment ago, the financiers, the bankers, the brokers, the people who loaded the ships, the people who unloaded the ships, they were all whites making tons and tons and tons of money, sending food back to the plantations. So the ship, think about it, just like we see these big trucks today. The ships would come in with the load of enslaved people, and then they would take a load of molasses and guns and food back down to the plantations. So that all that involved money, 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 money. All right.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
we're going to start looking here in a second at how and what specific corporations benefited greatly. And this is just scratching the surface, actually. So this slide says New York City and Southern cotton were a matched paired, sewn together by financial rewards and economic expansion. By the eve of the war, hundreds of businesses in New York and countless more throughout the North were connected to and dependent on cotton. As New York became the fulcrum of the U.S. cotton trade, merchants, shippers, auctioneers, bankers, brokers, insurers, and thousands of others were drawn to the burgeoning urban center. So when we look at New York, who doesn't like who doesn't like going to New York and spending some time in New York? It's a busy city. It's everything is there. Wall Street is there. Commerce is there. It is the largest financial center in the world. Well, that happened because of the cotton industry out of slavery.
Mm.
The financial epicenter of our country got its roots from the lives and the bodies of Black people. That is the point that I'm trying to make. When we look at the very financial center, the very political center of this nation, it was all built on the backs and lives and torture and murder and enslavement and rape of Black African people.
And that's why we need reparations. This is why we need reparations. And this is why education is so important, because there is a concerted effort to downplay the contributions that Black people have made to this country. Here in Texas, under the rules of not teaching critical race theory, the governor has signed into legislation. Basically, you can't teach that slavery was bad. You can't teach the true history of slavery because they don't want to make white kids and white people feel bad. So now there's a whole new generation of children growing up, and even their parents, people my age, millennials, who don't know the whole story, the whole history, who don't have this information, who don't realize that we're able to do what we're able to do. We're able to have Apple, Microsoft, the government that we have because of the enslaved people and what they went through.
That's right.
You got to educate yourselves, people. There's an effort to downplay it and erase it.
So when you go back to New York City, the epic center, the financial epic center of our country, of the world actually, and you see those tall buildings, those corporations, those banks, etc., the foundation of all of that was built on Black folks. Now, let's look at
and I love going to New York. I'm gonna be thinking about this now.
Yes, I love New York as well. We have family there. I was there actually. But
wow.
I mean, we have to, we're making the case for reparations. We're making the case. And you brought out something so important, Chloe, that whites want to now ignore this and wipe it out of the history books and not talk about it and not teach on it and just act like it didn't happen. Not only did it happen, but we're still reeling from the results of it. And they are still profiting from it.
Yeah.
We can't forget it. We will never forget it until there has been recognition, repudiation, repentance, and reparations for those injustices.
Yeah.
All right. Now, let's look at some of the players. And this is, again, just the tip of the iceberg. J.P. Morgan Chase. Junius Spencer Morgan, father of J. Pierpont Morgan, which is where we get J.P. Morgan, had his son study the cotton trade in the South at the start of his business career. Morgan Sr., a Massachusetts native who became a major banker and cotton broker in London, understood that knowledge of the cotton trade was essential to prospering in the commercial world in the 1850s. Now, all of these quotes are coming from Here to Equality. So we banked with Chase. Okay.
Several accounts. Yeah.
Several counts with Chase. Chase started on the backs of black people. Let that sink in. Lehman Brothers, an investment bank that went out of business in 2008, I believe. I grew up hearing about Lehman Brothers.
I had never heard of them until we did this research.
Yes, I grew up hearing about Lehman Brothers, and they were like just an institution that I would have never imagined would have gone out of business. And I had no idea that they had been knee deep in slavery. But they were. Lehman Brothers, widely viewed as one of the nation's most powerful investment banks, filed for bankruptcy in 2008. That was during the Great Recession. It collapsed under the stress of the mortgage lending crisis, but Lehman began in 1850 as a cotton brokerage in Montgomery, Alabama. It served as the state of Alabama's fiscal agent at one point and was designated to service the state's debts, interest payments, and other obligations. In 1870, the Lehman Brothers spearheaded the formation of the New York Stock Exchange. The New York Cotton Exchange. Isn't that something? So what they would do is they would buy cotton from the plantation owners, store it in their warehouses, and then sell it. So they were like the middlemen between the plantation owners and folks who wanted cotton, to use to create clothing and other textile types of companies. So Lehman Brothers literally made billions, again, from the backs, the lives of black African people.
And what did black people get? Nothing.
Nothing. But broken backs.
And broken promises.
Broken promises and broken lives. Real estate and shipping magnate John Jacob Astor made his fortune in furs, the Chinese opium trade, and the transportation of cotton to global ports. Now, this man, Chloe, you may not hear a lot about him, but he owned large swaths of Manhattan Island and was considered one of the wealthiest people alive. The word wealthiest is misspelled. But he is not known very well, but he bought lots and lots of land on the Manhattan Island. And look, you own land as precious as Manhattan Island, you will be uber rich. And he built that fortune on the cotton industry, which again was built obviously on slavery.
2 global ports. So 2 ports all around the world. So not only did America's economy benefit from it, but so did other countries as well, international countries. And what we were talking about in the other 2 parts about how, let's say, what we did for the Jewish people in the early 1900s after World War II and the Holocaust, America and European nations came together, and as we know, they gave the Jewish people Israel. There were other times in American history, as we went through before, where with the Japanese internment camps, we gave the Japanese people reparations, etc. But this country and international countries did not do anything to help Black people, African people here in America, or in Africa as well. And it's just I have to keep pointing out just the fact that we did it for other minority groups and other groups that suffered, but we didn't do it for black people who literally built this country and were a major part of the reason why we're so wealthy today and we're such a superpower today. Where we could, take another minority group like the Jewish people, come together with the United Kingdom, with Britain, and work to give the Jewish people Israel, which is a conflict that's still going on today. But nothing was done to help African slaves here. That just shows to me just the racism, the racism um, that is put towards Black people all across the world.
Absolutely. Now we got a comment here from No Known. She says, "This new generation coming up, uneducated about this all, due to legislation preventing the education, is going to lead to another generation of white privilege, but on steroids, in my opinion." And I agree with that very much so.
Me
That's the
too.
danger of those anti-critical race theory laws, those that legislation that, by the way, Texas is the lead on that. Texas, Florida are really out there, saying no, we're not teaching slavery. It's offensive to whites, and it didn't really happen like that, and they were really treated very well, and all that craziness. Um, yeah, and it will cause this next generation of whites, because of ignorance of this stuff, to think that, well, blacks are in the position they're in. They're poor. They're this and that because they're lazy. They're unintelligent. They're inferior. This is what God made for them, not knowing. No, 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 no. This is by design. The system isn't broken. This is your ancestors designed the system this way. And this is the reason why African American people here in this country are so the wealth of African American people is so beneath, so low, so lower than Europeans. It's not. It has nothing to do with our inherent intelligence or morality. It's because the system was designed to benefit your ancestors, young man. And I agree so much with No None that that young man will not have the benefit of understanding this, because certain states have said we're not teaching that. That will make that young man uncomfortable to know that his great great grandfather benefited so much from the institution of slavery.
And a lot of Black folks as well. We have to
Amen.
put it on ourselves to teach our children,
Amen.
to teach the young people in our lives. My godson, for example, I asked him some question about did he know something? I think it was about slavery or something like that, and whether or not that he was being taught in school. And he said no, they were not teaching it. So every time I'm around him, I always make sure to teach Black history and go beyond slavery, go back to Africa. I tell him about Mansa Musa. I tell him about Jesus Christ and what he did. I tell him about all of that because the schools are not teaching it. So I make sure that I do it, and we all have to do that. Those of us who are in the know and who have this knowledge.
That's right. Very good. Tiffany and Company. I grew up hearing
Oh,
about the jeweler Tiffany.
I like
Well,
them too.
yeah,
Ah,
well, here we go.
yeah.
Jeweler Charles Lewis Tiffany opened the iconic flagship Tiffany shop on New York City's Broadway Street in 1837 with capital from his father, Comfort Tiffany, whose own fortune had been derived from the operation of a cotton manufacturing company in what would become Danielsonville, Connecticut. Archibald Gracie Jr., the son of the um, eponymous Scottish, hope I pronounced that word right, international shipper of Gracie Mansion fame, left New York City to become a cotton broker in Mobile, Alabama. The governor's mansion in New York is called Gracie. mansion, by the way. And so all that comes from, again, the cotton industry. So this renowned jeweler, Tiffany and Company. I mean, you buy some jewelry from Tiffany, you're going to spend a lot of money and you're going to have some status. Well, it was all built on the backs of black people.
Mm. And one of my, and a very famous artist, Beyonce, she just did a campaign with them a couple years ago that was very big, where she wore, I guess, their most valuable diamond or something. And she's come out lately. I don't know if you did. I don't think you listened to her, but she's come out lately
I don't.
with her past few albums with talking about black people and black issue and black struggles. Yet is flaunting and wearing Tiffany and Company's diamonds.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm sure she probably doesn't know about this history either.
Wow.
I want to send this to her. To her people.
That's why more people need to tune in, because we're gonna bring the heat, we're gonna bring the tea, we're gonna bring the knowledge. We're gonna bring it every time. Every time you're gonna hear something you didn't know. You're gonna learn every time. And we're bringing these quotes out of this book because we know some folks don't read, so we're doggone it, we'll read the book to you. Okay? I mean, it's so sad. The old saying, want to hide something from a black man, put it in a book.
Yeah.
Well, all right, fine. We'll just read the book to you. Tune in and we'll read it to you. That's what we're basically doing, because all of these quotes came from Here to Equality. All right, Tiffany Company. Who's next? Let's go now to the great universities of this country. Brown University was funded by slave labor. Brown is located in Rhode Island, funded by slave labor, the cotton industry. Who else? Princeton University, the great renowned Princeton University, funded from the cotton industry off the backs of black people. Who else? Harvard University, funded on the backs, the blood, sweat, and tears of black people. So, these schools, Princeton, Brown, Harvard, we look at them as being so illustrious and so awesome.
And liberal and
regal, that's right, all of that, Chloe. Well, they are what they are because they started from the slave labor of black people. So if all you think about it, Chloe, let's break it down. Let's think about the professors and the students who were able to make all this money from the cotton industry. And so now they can dedicate their time to study, to research, to education, because they're making a whole bunch of money from pennies of investment because of black folks down south. Okay? And some of them had slaves. Not nowhere near like the South, but some of these universities had actual slaves, enslaved people, pardon me. They had some enslaved people that they actually had on their books. So yeah, you can be considered smart and genius and all of that when you're getting that advantage from the work and effort, the blood, sweat, and tears of other people.
Yeah, and be considered so liberal and elitist, yet your very university was funded by slave labor. I mean, I don't know if that is why. I know with Harvard, they try to. I think it's if a student's family makes less than $100,000, they'll the student can attend tuition free and some other things that they try to do with scholarships. But it obviously doesn't go far enough.
Well, that's for black and white students, right?
True. Yeah, that's for black and white students.
Asians,
anyone who applies. Yeah.
So forth. So that's not real reparations in my mind.
Yeah, that's true. So they may be thinking, well, let's just do this because they know that Harvard knows its own history, but it doesn't. It is nowhere near what we're talking about, and it's not reparations at all because it's not focused on the descendants of black enslaved people.
And what is Harvard's endowment? What is it, like $5 billion or something?
Huge. It's huge.
I mean, they'll never go broke. And where did that money? How were they able to accumulate that money, Chloe? Because of the backbreaking work that enslaved Africans did, who oftentimes I read and have heard of stories of some of the enslaved people just dying in the fields.
Mm.
And by the way, I'm from the country. All right. I worked in those fields. I wasn't old enough to pick cotton. Cotton was kind of gone by the time I was a teenager. But I worked in tobacco fields. And I won't even compare the work that I did in tobacco fields during the summer to buy school clothes with what our ancestors had to do as enslaved people. So I'm not making that comparison. But I got a small taste of what it's like to be out in that sun, in those fields, working like that. But again, there's no comparison. I could leave anytime I wanted to. I was not anyone's property. I didn't work from sun up to sundown and then go to a shack or shanty house or eat the slop and all that. So I'm not comparing it. But I got a little small taste of that. Harvard University. Yale. Let's not leave out Yale. I mean, Chloe, I'm bringing this out because we look at these schools as great schools, and only the smartest of the smartest people go to these schools. Well, they're not so smart, and they're not all of this when you realize these schools were built on the bodies of our ancestors.
Yeah. And the way they try to present themselves too, as kind of above
elitist, like you said earlier.
Elitist. Yeah. Well, we didn't participate in those things that happened down south. Yes, you did.
Yes,
you benefited from it.
Big time.
Huge.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Slaveholders were given land and money and all of that to these schools. That's how they got started. Columbia University. Okay, another institution that started and benefited from the bodies of our ancestors. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Interesting story behind this school's involvement with slavery, Chloe. This school, I don't know if people realize this, and it kind of touches home for us because we're originally from North Carolina. But this school was the very first public institution in the country.
I didn't realize that.
Yes, the other schools were private, but this was the first public institution. And all of its initial funding, every penny of it, all of the land that it built upon was contributed by plantation owners.
UNC Chapel Hill.
UNC Chapel Hill, Tar Heels. That's right. Today, some people would consider Chapel Hill to be a rather liberal, progressive school.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't go so far with that because we see how liberal, progressive Chapel Hill treated Miss Hannah Jones with her tenureship, right?
Oh yeah, that the way they did Dr. Jones was absolutely horrendous. It was, and for those of you who don't know, Dr. Hannah Jones, she started the 1619 project. She's a very prolific professor, doctor, and that
And
project has
everybody
gotten a lot of
everybody should read that book that came out of that project.
yes,
Sorry for interrupting.
yes, yes. The 1619 project. It's gotten a lot of backlash in conservative circles all across the country. And basically, the premise of the 1619 project is 1619 was the year that the first African person was brought to this country. And Dr. Jones is saying, that's really when that really should be the focal point of this country, because basically what we're saying here, that this country was founded and built upon enslaved African people. And so she got a lot of backlash for that. And she was up for tenure at a professorship job at UNC. And because of that backlash, they just completely treated her wrong. Didn't they? They never gave her tenure, right?
Well, no, and
Yeah.
in fact, she withdrew her name from consideration.
Yeah. Yep. And now she's teaching at another college. I don't remember where.
I think didn't she go
Um,
to Howard?
oh yeah, I think it's Howard. I know it was a HBCU.
Yeah, I think she ended up at Howard.
So in the end, it worked out fine. But wow, the way they treated her was horrendous.
So
But
yeah,
yes, everyone go check out the 1619 project. Very informational.
so yes, the storied Tar Heels has its roots
You
in
putting some extra emphasis on it, Dad, because you're a Duke fan, but let's point that
well,
out a little bit.
hey, in fairness, Duke University has history too. Here it is.
Yeah.
I knew you all were going to say that. I knew for the folks who are listening, our house is divided down the middle when the Duke and Tar Heels are playing each other. I am the only person in my family, and I mean, I'm talking about my great big wide family, not just my immediate family. I am the only Duke University fan. Well, Jamel is a Duke fan. By
Oh,
Yeah, he's
okay.
a Duke fan. But other
Yeah.
than that, it's just me. So I knew I had to I knew I had to mention Duke. So Duke also benefited from slavery. I want to go back, Chloe, and recognize a couple of comments that Rebels made. It is always such a pleasure to see Reverend Harper with us. And he says, thanks for the knowledge. Black history is paramount to the culture. Yes, thank you for thanking us. It is our joy and honor to work during the week to research these issues so that we can bring a show that is informative. That's what we want. So that right there is the greatest um, thank you that you can give, just recognizing that. So thank you.
Thank you.
And the political scientist asked, I think she's asking of me, did your family get paid for working in the tobacco field? Um, there's a bit of history there, political scientist. Let me explain a little bit. My family, I was able to do my family research, and I was able to go back to 1830. I found my great great grandfather. He was on the Williams plantation. My family's surname is Williams. We got that name from the family of uh, Captain Stephen Williams, who was a Confederate colonel, and he enslaved my family. And after slavery ended, um, my family just basically stayed on his plantation and continued working for him. Um, they began to basically do sharecropping for him and for other whites in the area. For example, my grandmother was a sharecropper on a white man's strawberry farm for many, many, many years. So where I grew up in North Carolina, yes, it's a bunch of farmland, tobacco, strawberries, corn, beans, etc. And during the summer months, the young blacks not the young whites, but the young blacks were expected to go into the fields to work, to make money to buy your school clothes for the upcoming school year. So yes, we were paid for that work. This was in the 70s. This were in the 70s, but ironically, one of the white men that we worked for, he had gone to the local prison camp and purchased an older black man who worked for him free on his farm. And I want to repeat that because I know your ears probably just said, what did I just hear? Yes, in the 70s, when I was a teenager, there was a man that we worked for. His name was Lawrence. We called him Mr. Lawrence. He was a white man, big farmer. And Mr. Lawrence had gone to the local prison in the 70s and purchased an older black man. We only knew him by his name, John. We called him Mr. John. Mr. John had to have been about 70, 80 years old. Lawrence went and paid for that man, bought him, and the state of North Carolina allowed Lawrence in the 70s to buy Mr. John. And Lawrence treated Mr. John like a slave. I seen him beat Mr. John with tobacco stalks. I saw that with my own eyes. I was probably 11, 12 years old. And out of everybody, I couldn't take it. I spoke up at 11 or 12 years old. It just got me. I just could not stand to see this white man treat this old black man like a slave. So this thing of justice was in me as far back as I can remember. God just sensitized this to me. He put this on my heart. This has been a part of who I am, my calling for years. I was probably 12 or 13 years old. And I remember my aunts and grandmother would say, be quiet, boy, be quiet. Keep your mouth closed. You too grown. That ain't that. You're gonna get yourself hurt out here. You're gonna make one of these white men jump on you or kill you or something out here running your mouth. So they were, saying what they were saying to try to prevent me from, like so many other young blacks who had spoken out against this racism, from preventing me from getting killed or shot or lynched or something. But I had to speak out, and I've been speaking out ever since. So that's a long way of answering your question, political science. Yes, we did get paid for the work that we did. I think, if I recall, I made about $3 an hour. But Mr. John, in the 70s, it brings me to tears thinking about it even now. Mr. John, in the 70s, was enslaved. He apparently had been in prison for something. I don't know what it was. And back then, North Carolina permitted white business owners to go to local prisons and literally buy black people. So that was 100 years after slavery ended. Yet slavery was still going on in the state of North Carolina, where I'm from.
And still now today, because of the 13th Amendment. Slavery was abolished in all instances, except for when a person is convicted of a felony and go to prison. So we still have that in the 13th Amendment. A lot of people don't realize that slavery has not been completely abolished because of that exception in the 13th Amendment. So when a person is convicted of a felony under the 13th Amendment, it is as if they go back into slavery, which is why a lot of convicted felons, their rights are taken away. The state is able, if they go to prison, to basically do what they want with them. And so that still exists. It's sad, but it still does too.
Pursuant to the 13th Amendment, I remember I told a young man that I was representing in court, and he started crying. He had never heard that once he uh, was convicted of a felony, he would basically become a slave under our Constitution. Some more comments. Your mom says, remember Black Lives Matter recently demanded those Ivy League schools begin to deal with their racist past? Absolutely. In fact, one that we'll mention here in a moment, Georgetown University, I think took some serious steps toward doing just that. No None says there are many establishments in existence today that are rooted in the exploitation of minorities, that it can be difficult to maneuver on a day by day basis while avoiding these establishments. That is very true. Um, that is extremely true. You bring out a very important point. And so, if we try to avoid all the establishments, all the companies, all the corporations, et cetera, that have benefited from slavery, yeah, we would almost have to leave the country. So I guess we're not suggesting that we completely, because we can't, just cut ourselves off from these corporations. Like I said, we bank with Chase, knowing that Chase, its early beginnings was based on the cotton industry, based on slavery. But it's just still good to be aware of it. And where we can, I think we should withdraw our support from certain corporations. Um, I'm trying to think of some where, for example, for me, this is me. This is my. I just thought about it. I have not watched a National Football League game. I have boycotted the NFL. My wife and I haven't. We love football. I mean, she's a football fanatic, and I mean, football is huge in our family. It was a Sunday get together for me, my wife, and Chloe and my son Caleb. But the way they dealt with Kaepernick, the way they have dealt with the coaches, the way they have just dealt with the issues of race, I boycotted them. I said that's enough. I'm not lending my eyes and spending my money with an organization that racist. I'm not doing it. So where we can, I think we should withdraw our support. I wish the Black community at large would do so, where we can. But you're right. Slavery runs so deep in this country. The cotton industry and the exploitation of Black people runs so deep that, man, we would have to basically go to another country to completely avoid all the corporations that have benefited from this institution. Good
We
point.
can also ask or demand that the government hits them where it hurts, which is their money, which is to tax these corporations and then use it to supply money reparations for Black descendants of slaves. I think that would be one solution, to really get their attention and to really um, repudiate. What were the 4 R's? Help me, Dad.
Yeah. Recognize the injustices, repudiate them, repent from them, and repair the results of them.
Take that money that they tax these corporations with, put it into some type of fund with the government, and give reparations to Black descendants of slaves.
Yes. All right. Trying to move along here. No Known says we must continue to try to avoid them until they take responsibility for the roots. And the show and this show makes it easier for us all to do just that. Thank you so much. Absolutely. The
Thank you.
political scientist says, I am a man. So I think one of us may have referred to the political scientist as she or her. So thank you for letting us know. So yeah, there's some other comments here. I'm trying to move on a little bit. Georgetown. So yes, Georgetown. But Georgetown at least acknowledged and are trying to. Last I heard, Georgetown was trying to do some reparations for the descendants of the 200 or so enslaved blacks. From what I understand, Georgetown at one point um, had enslaved about 200 or so people, and they sold those 200 or so people to pay off some debts. Okay. And they were trying to find the descendants of those 200 or so people and were offering them different types of reparation. Brooks Brothers. Now, going back to something No Known said here just a second ago, this runs so deep, how do we avoid it? Well, here we go. Here, Brooks Brothers. This is a store that I have bought many suits from over the years. As a matter of fact, as of probably, I would say over the last 15 years, I haven't bought a suit from any store other than Brooks Brothers. This is where I buy my suits. Okay. And I know and knew that they were knee deep in slavery. That's how they were built. The Brooks Brothers, those brothers, were knee deep in the institution of slavery. Um, so I very well may make that decision not to buy anything else from Brooks Brothers. Um, just the way this is sort of striking me.
Yeah, you love you a suit from Brooks Brothers, Dad.
Absolutely, they make some great suits for a relatively affordable price. I mean, the suits I bought from them, they still last to this day. They still look good 15 years later. And I also buy only Allen Edmonds shoes. This is when I'm in court. And I haven't researched Allen Edmonds. I don't know if they have some history in slavery, but I would not be surprised.
Yeah.
Brooks Brothers, New York Life. So we saw the banks. Now we're seeing and then we looked at the universities, now the insurance companies, because a lot of these enslaved people had to be insured. The ships that were traveling and bringing them back and forth from Africa, those ships had to be insured. This is one of the big insurance companies that insured a lot of those ships and a lot of those enslaved people. New York Life. Another
I
one.
never thought about that. The
Yes,
insurance companies
that's right.
being involved in the slave trade.
Yeah,
Wow.
because if you think about it, I tell you what, if you think about slavery as a business, well, what do you do with the stuff you value and you don't want to suffer a loss if you lose it or if it's stolen or destroyed? You insure it,
Wow. Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Like your car, like your house, like other stuff. You insure it. So they insured our ancestors.
Mm.
And the insurance companies that wrote a lot of those policies, New York Life, Aetna, and others. So the insurance industry, knee deep in slavery. Last of all, well, not last of all, but another big portion is the railroad industry. Blacks basically built the railroad system. Okay, I remember my father. One of his earliest jobs was on the railroad line, laying those metal pieces.
Mm. Isn't that how Rockefeller made most of his money?
I think Rockefeller was involved in the railroad system. I think he was also involved in oil, you,
Well,
different things.
yeah.
So we just see my point here is slavery was the foundation of most industries that built and made America the great nation that it is.
Wow.
Not to leave out the White House. Slaves built it. Enslaved Africans built the White House and the Capitol building. All right? So now we come to the question that we have given you 32 exhibits. If we were in trial, these would be exhibits. We have given you 32 exhibits today. We gave 15 or 20 exhibits in part 2, and there were 15 or 20 exhibits in part 3. And we offered expert testimony through Professor William Darity and his co-author, Ms. Sullivan, and expert testimony from Edward Batista, okay, through their books. So now the question becomes, if you listeners were the jury members, we would now ask for a certain amount of damages. If you all believe that we have made our case, then we would ask for some damages. So as I promise you, the very last thing that I want to show you is what amount of money do we believe would adequately close the wealth gap and set African Americans up to have a better future, especially those who have been left behind. And there are some African Americans who are doing fabulously well. LeBron James, Oprah Winfrey, Michael Jordan, Joseph Smith, Robert Johnson. We could name many who are doing quite well. They often tend to be in the entertainment industry or athletes and so on, but they make up a fraction of the African American community. And so we're talking about the African American community collectively. What amount of money would compensate and redress our community for slavery, Jim Crow, and systemic racism? Well, we have a figure. Professor William Darity, again, the author of From Here to Equality, estimates that $10 to $12 trillion to eligible Black Americans would be enough reparations to redress the past and set us up for a better future. $10 to $12 trillion to eligible Black Americans. And one of the eligibility requirements that he mentions is that they would have to be able to trace their descendancy back to an enslaved person.
10 to 12 trillion.
Yes.
Which, when you think about it, is really nothing compared to the amount of wealth that America has amassed throughout the years, throughout the 400 years since slavery. It's nothing. We sent just to Ukraine this year, what, about $2 trillion in money?
Been that much?
I want to say it was about $1 trillion in money and billions of dollars in weapons.
Wow. That's amazing.
Just this year. Let me check and verify that.
All right, some last comments. The political scientist, he says, thank you for answering. You're absolutely welcome. No, you're right about the NFL, their race norming. Oh boy, that's right. I forgot to mention that race norming policy is outright, blatantly racist. You're absolutely right. Basically, for those who don't know what that race norming policy is, essentially the NFL had agreed to pay damages to former football players who had suffered CTE, And, CTE is this brain damage that some football players experience from getting banged upside the head and falling on their heads and all that during football. But in order to prove their eligibility, they had to be seen by a doctor, and the doctor had to sign off on whatever award they were trying to get. And the NFL required of black players, basically, the NFL required of doctors that they sort of reduce potential brain damage to black players on the theory that black players has less cognitive abilities in the first place. So, this really happened. So I don't know the exact numbers, but let's suppose you needed a score of 10 to get awarded some compensation, some retirement money. And let's say a black person got a 10. The doctor said, okay, yeah, you have suffered some CTE here. I'm going to score you at 10. Well, the race norming policy of the NFL would require that 10 be reduced on the theory that black players had less cognitive ability in the first place.
Mm.
So in other words, black players probably started out at -1. So reduce their score from 10 to 9, which basically meant, Chloe, many black players were being denied the money because of that race norming. I mean, that is blatantly you're already racist for the way you dealt with Kaepernick and him trying to bring attention to issues that affected 70% of your workforce. You're already racist for not hiring black coaches at an equitable rate. You're already racist for not having any black owners, right? But then on top of all of that, you create this explicitly, blatantly racist policy to deny those same black players compensation for injuries they suffered, making you billions. I said, no way can I support an organization like this. No way. No way. Nope.
They just model what the United States government has done and what businesses have done in this country. Using enslaved slave labor to make these trillions of dollars, as we talked about before, and then not giving those enslaved people or former enslaved people reparations. The same thing that they did with the NFL. They just modeled it after what the government has done. So it just blankets our entire country and economy. And earlier I mentioned that we gave I think a $2 trillion to Ukraine. It was actually 40 billion, and some other billions in weapons.
But that's a big difference.
That's a big difference, yeah.
I'm getting ready to say, whoa.
I thought I had read somewhere that it was a trillion, but no, it was in the billions. But it's still, my larger point is still our economy, the wealth that America has amassed, the taxation that the government does. If we tax more of the rich and these corporations that have benefited from slave labor, we can meet that number and give reparations to black descendants of slaves. That's what we deserve. And that's what this country needs, that atonement.
In fact, No, you make an excellent point there before I talk about No's last comment. I think you probably said the most important thing throughout this whole conversation today, Chloe, and that is we can't move on until this injustice has been dealt with. We, as a nation, we can't move on. In fact, dare I say, I don't think that there will ever be peace between the races in this country until reparations have been paid. because that is just this big sore, this big wound that just can't heal until it gets proper attention. So we're gonna always have that issue. It's really what you hear protesters saying: no justice, no peace.
Yep.
Bottom line. So I think what you said is really the most important part. It's not just about getting financial, economic compensation, but it's also about being able to move on. So we can just move on from this whole issue. As Black Americans, we can move on. As white Americans, we can move on.
Yeah.
All right. So yes, thank you for saying that. No says, I would argue that an African American should automatically qualify for the reparations and shouldn't have to prove their slavery lineage, and the burden should fall on the government to prove they don't. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right. That makes it really
Okay.
interesting. Well, what do you say about that, Chloe, as we come to a close?
I think we have to define what an African American is, because I know that, let's take Elon Musk, for example. He was born in South Africa. Technically, he is African.
Great point.
Now,
Great point.
now he lives in Texas, actually. So now he is African American. I don't believe that he should qualify.
Over $200 billion.
Exactly.
And has come out, by the way, as a very deeply ultra conservative person here.
Yeah.
But anyway, no.
Very much so.
Yeah, definitely.
And, a first generation African person, I don't know if they should qualify either. I think it needs to be a Black descendant of an enslaved person, in this country.
Well, I would want to know from No, because there's the statement leaves something open, and that is, and I don't know if this is I believe this is a she, right? No.
I think she is. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So No leaves something open. She leaves a question unanswered, and that is, so she says that if you're Black, then you shouldn't have to prove that you are a descendant of enslaved people, but the government has the burden of proving that you are not. So the assumption is, if you're Black, you descended from slavery. All right. So my question is, if the government was able to prove that Black person was not a descendant of slavery, would they then, No, in your opinion, should they then be denied reparations? Is my question clear, Chloe?
Yeah. So basically, the basic assumption is, if you're a Black American, you qualify for reparations.
Well, she didn't say. Did she say? She said African American. Yes. Okay.
Or African American.
Yeah.
But
same thing.
Like I said, African American could be Elon Musk. But if we're just thinking of it as Black people.
Okay. Well. Okay. Hold on. You're right. Okay. I got to go back to your comment. So Black American and African American are not the same thing necessarily.
Not necessarily. I don't think.
All right. So I think she's talking about Black American. So let's assume she's talking about Black American.
Okay, so the basic assumption is, if you're a Black American, you qualify for reparations, unless the government can prove that you were not a descendant of slave. So yes, I guess the question is, okay, then can you, if the government proves that this Black American is not a descendant of a slave, does she believe that they then don't qualify for reparations?
Well, Chloe, we're 0 for 2. No is also a guy. So.
Oh, really? Oh, my bad.
Sorry about that. You all.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. And by the way, I am very heartened and encouraged to know that brothers are tuning in. Yes.
Yeah, for real.
Seriously.
Yes.
Yes, that is awesome. So thank you for pointing out, no, that you're a dude. but we do want you to answer that question. So we understand what you're saying, that a Black American should, uh, based on default, be approved unless the government can prove that they are not a descendant of slavery. So our question is, suppose the government in fact proves that this Black American did not descend from slavery, then should the government be able to deny reparations for that person?
That's a question, because there were some free Black folks back then as well. I mean, there were not a lot, but there were some free Black folks. Some Black people went up to Canada, and then they may have come back down to the United States. You know, some people immigrated from Africa maybe in the late 1800s or 1900s, or the Caribbean. So, I mean, that's a good question. There's all those questions.
Yeah. So no, we're waiting on that answer. Let us know. And no says, to be completely open, I'm Native American. Well, look, you've been done wrong too. So
Yes.
so
Yes.
I remember when Nelson Mandela came here in 1990. Obviously there's connection between a Black African and Black Americans, obviously. But he said something that I think stunned a lot of people. He said that although obviously he had a kindred spirit with Black Americans, he said he really, really, however, could identify even more so with Native Americans, because they were the original landowners and had been treated so badly by Europeans. And that was kind of the same thing they had suffered. They were the original landowners and were colonized. So,
Yeah.
so no, my point is, that's why we started. The story of slavery actually begins with Native Americans, because the land was stolen from Native Americans. And now we are aware that there were some Native Americans who also owned slaves as well. But based on my research, many of them did that because of their effort of trying to sort of fit in with the Europeans. And it has not been, to me, enough for African Americans to see Native Americans as, the enemy. Although there were some Native Americans who owned slaves, and in every group of people, you got bigots, you got racists, you got some Black racists, you got some Native American racists, you got, European, Caucasian racists, and so on. But we just appreciate you showing up and participating and asking questions, great questions, by the way, and your comments. So you don't have to be Black to be a part of this show. In fact, it makes it even more interesting to have a diverse audience.
Yeah. Yeah. We want rebels of all colors.
That is right.
It's a great question, though. I think
I think no answered our question. Let me see. There would be a second category based on when arrival occurred, because they may have still been harmed even if not tying to slavery lineage. That's a very, 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 very thoughtful question, and it is not one I figured out. Maybe William Darity in his book From Here to Equality has figured that out. I think he did. I will look at it again. And your mom points out that Russell Wilson, who is the starting quarterback for the Denver Broncos, descended from free Blacks. So as you
that's
said,
a good point, man. Yeah.
as you said, there are many free Blacks. So that ties into no known here. The political scientist just made a very provocative statement saying that we're all Native Americans, not Black or African American. Check the census. I love it. I love it. Bring it on, baby. Bring it on. Bring it on. Bring it on.
I
But
mean, what this country has done to Native Americans is just it's horrendous. The pillaging, the raping, the killing, bringing all of the diseases, forcing Native American children to assimilate.
the Trail of Tears.
Um, yes, to assimilate into white culture. The Trail of Tears, like you said, that I mean, and me and my brother, we took a trip to Utah a couple months ago, and we looked at some of the bison, and it just touched me so profoundly how when the European settlers came to this country, there were millions of bison in this country, and the Native Americans, a lot of Native American nations relied heavily on the bison. The bison were sacred to them. The bison were everything. It was the source of their economy, based on the research that I've done. And by killing the bison, the government purposely purposefully targeted the bison in order to kill off the Native Americans. So the bison went from millions and millions, tens of millions in this country to now I think there's maybe less than 1,000. And
Wow.
that was purposefully done to try to harm the Native American communities that
Wow.
relied so heavily on them.
Man.
Yeah.
Man. So yeah. So there's a legitimate claim from Native Americans for reparations, in other words.
hmm
All right, so it's been almost 2 hours. We really wasn't trying to go that long, but thank you all for staying with us, and we hope you got something from this. Remember, tomorrow is June 19th, and that was the reason why we did this show in the first place for the last 3 weeks. So celebrate Juneteenth tomorrow. I think we all get Monday off. So enjoy it. We enjoyed having every single one of you. We enjoyed the questions and the comments. Thank you, sweetheart, my wife, for being the producer.
And happy Father's Day, Dad. Tomorrow is Father's Day.
Wow.
I will not get off of this live without sending you a public happy Father's Day. I am just, me and Caleb, we're just so blessed to have you as our father, the leader of our family, um, business counselor, spiritual advisor, pastor, all of that. We are just so blessed to have you. And I love you very, very, very much. It is such a pleasure to be able to
You're
be
trying
in
to make
business
me
with
cry
you.
up here in front of these folks. That's what you're trying to do.
I had to say it. I mean, it's just such a blessing. It's such a blessing and an honor to be able to do all of this with you and with Mom. So happy Father's Day, and happy Father's Day to all of our listeners who are fathers as well.
You know, when I hear you and Caleb say, kind words and happy Father's Day and all that to me, in my mind, you know where my mind goes to?
Where?
To your mom. You know, she is really the one. She's the one to me, who is all that and a bag of chips for the Corbett family.
She is.
Yeah.
She really is.
Yeah. I mean, really, I appreciate it all, but I just honor her. And,
Yeah.
but thank you nonetheless. I appreciate it. I've done the best I could for you and Caleb. And, no nonsense. Thank you for a very insightful discussion. Thank you for participating. And that's the word out. Please like, share, and continue showing up and commenting when we do these. I promise you they won't be 2 hours every time. This one was just special, given that it's Juneteenth. So before we talk another 30 minutes, we're going to get out of here.
And just one last thing, let us know what topics you would like us to talk about as well.
Yeah.
We love doing these deep dives into various topics like we did with reparations. So let us know down below as well. Like, comment, share.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure.
Peace, love, and soul.
Happy Juneteenth. Happy Father's Day, y'all.
One other thing, I don't know if y'all can hear me. Please pray for my family. I had death in my family. My oldest sibling, Gloria Young, passed. Well, she's not a young now. She's married, but she passed a couple of days ago. Keep my family in prayer. God bless you all. We are out of here. Happy Father's Day to all of you fathers. Bye-bye.